Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. All this time I was sure that our marriage was strong and reliable. I was ready to do everything to make our life happy and full of love. But one day I discovered that my wife was only using me as a means to her own ends. She had cheated on me and it was not the first time. I realized that all along she had her own plan and I was just a puppet in her hands. But I wasn't going to stay idle and decided to get back at her for her betrayal. Matvey and Alina had known each other since high school. The boy had been in love with the first beauty of their school for many years and once even worked up the courage to ask her out. But she sharply rejected him. She preferred to go out with a cocky high school student named Pasha. He seemed mature and very cool to her. Matvey sometimes heard other girls whispering behind his back discussing his unrequited love. And Alina herself was with Pavel right up until graduation. After graduation Matvey studied at university working in parallel and after graduation began to rise by leaps and bounds on the career ladder. He managed to get a job at an international company. He began to earn a lot of money. He bought himself a spacious apartment and a nice car and helped his parents. He also liked to travel. The impressions of travel greatly energized him. One day he was invited to another meeting of classmates. Matvey decided to go there for a change. It was there that his meeting with Alina took place many years later. When she saw Matvey she could not even believe her eyes. The man, though clothed, was restrained but she roughly understood the cost of all these things on him. They were talking. Alina questioned her former suitor with great interest about what he was living now. And by the minute she was getting more and more into some kind of relationship with him. They exchanged phone numbers and the next day Alina was the first to call. Now after all these years she herself made a date with Matvey. Over all these years he had not lost his warm feelings for Alina. And although in the past she had rejected him and dated someone else, none of that mattered. Now they met as adults. And Matvey was glad that Alina was finally interested in him herself. Their relationship began very quickly. Alina knew what she wanted from this life. So the slow development of the novel did not interest her. Their wedding took place just 6 months later. Although Matvey's parents tried to tell him it was too soon. And it was still necessary to get to know each other better. They began to travel together. Matvey showed his wife various countries and their local colors. Alina watched everything with her mouth open and was as excited as a child. When they returned to their city the woman began to take more and more of her work from Hula. Explaining that she was not feeling well. At the same time she often began to complain to her husband that she was very tired of working. Her bosses didn't appreciate her. And she felt that she was wasting her time there. These were no longer subtle hints but real manipulations. And Matvey fell for it. He still could not rejoice that the love of his youth, now his lawful spouse. Of course after all this talk he himself suggested that she quit her job and rest at home. He would take care of everything. Alina's dream finally came true. She lives in her husband's luxurious apartment. He allows her not to work and does not deny her anything. They lived like this for a few more years. And then her husband's business trip, which lasted several weeks, happened. He and his wife would call each other late at night. But sometimes she would miss a call. Claiming that she was very tired from the day. When Matvey returned it was as if the atmosphere in his home had changed. His wife did not welcome him with the same joy as usual. She acted rather reserved and even a little aloof which really hurt the man. He thought she had something going on or was just in a bad mood. So he didn't emphasize it. Intuitively he sensed that something was wrong. But he didn't give it much thought. During the next month that he was in town his wife's being just as slightly different. She started spending more and more time with her girlfriends. Sometimes returning home and even later than her husband. When Matvey asked her what she was doing all that time away from home. She said that her best friend was also out of work now. And they went to salons and sports centers together or just went for a walk. One day Matvey was supposed to have a business meeting at a restaurant in the center of town. On that day things did not go well from the very morning. First he left important documents at home and on his way back to pick them up. He was late for work. Then some minor mishaps at the office threw him off balance. And now he was stuck in a traffic jam not far from that very restaurant. As he sat in his car irritably texting his colleague that he might be late because of the traffic situation. His attention was caught by two silhouettes gliding outside the window. Matvey looked up and saw a couple. His wife was walking with some man and was hanging out with him interestedly. The husband's previously unknown feeling of jealousy pricked him. He could see for sure that it was his wife and how she was enjoying herself in the company of another man. Interesting choice of girlfriends she has of course. He thought irritatedly. The traffic was moving very slowly and Matvey decided to follow where the two men were going. They were going straight to the restaurant where Matvey himself was headed. After about 10 minutes all the cars parted and the man was able to turn around and park beside the place. He went in very carefully looking around to see where his wife was sitting but at the same time not to get caught. He was lucky. The table at which his meeting was taking place was at a decent distance from the table where Alina was sitting with her companion. While this colleague was talking to his partners Matvey was watching his wife without blinking. At last he could make out who she was with. The face seemed painfully familiar but the man had to strain his memory hard to figure out who it was. With horror to himself he recognized in her companion, Paul, the same one Alina had dated back in high school. With each passing minute his faith in the best was evaporating faster and faster. Alina openly flirted with Pasha and at one point he began stroking her thigh. Mavi desperately wanted to take out the anger that was boiling inside of him on these two, but he was held hostage to the situation. The meeting was very important. He could not lose face. As a result, the man thought, since these two were acting this way, their relationship had not lasted the first day. Yes, he was hurt because of this infidelity. He was ready to tear up and throw up. But he understood that these emotions would not make things better. He could deal with the unfaithful spouse later, but now he had better things to do. He concentrated on the negotiations and held them to the highest standard. Alina and her lover left before he did. It was obvious they were in a hurry to finally get some privacy. Afterwards, Matvey drove home. He threw all of Alina's belongings into bags and took them to the nearest garbage can. When the trader returned home, she was extremely surprised. The door was locked from the inside with a latch. Then her husband opened it. He said that now she no longer lived here. And if she had time, she could still fight the local bums at the dump for her clothes. The woman first thought her husband was joking, but when the door slammed in her face, she realized that he had found out. The couple divorced. Matvey was even glad that his mother had insisted on a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. It turned out to be very convenient. Alina never once apologized to Matvey for her betrayal. Nothing bad happened for her. She simply acted out of self-interest. For a long time after school, she was constantly on and off with Pavel because he could not provide her with everything. But when she found out that Pavel's financial situation had improved, she was the first to make contact. In fact, he was the only one she really loved. But his plight a few years ago prevented her from staying with him. She met Matthew and realized that he could give her the life she wanted. Now she began to live with Pavel again. Matvey understood that Alina would forever be the one who would be constantly on the lookout for a better place. She would change her partners an endless number of times without sticking with anyone for long. Instead of building a future with her husband, helping him and reaching for the heights together, she has chosen to live a parasitic lifestyle. But life is complicated. And staying on the crest of success all the time won't work. Black bars happen to everyone. So the claim that Paul was lucky to stay with such a woman together was highly questionable. She would stay with him, but only until his first bad luck. Second story. I might never have known the truth about my wife. But when my friend suddenly showed up with the words, "I need to tell you something about your wife," I felt something was wrong. I couldn't even think what he was going to say. But what followed was so amazing that I didn't know what to do next. It turned out that my wife had been cheating on me for months. And my friend had known about it all along. He told me everything he knew. And I decided to take justice into my own hands. I got my revenge on her for cheating. In this video, I will tell you the whole story. And you will learn how I found out the truth about my wife. And how I decided to get revenge on her. Ruslan and Sophia had been married for 6 years. Sonia was a manicurist. And Ruslan worked for a small company as a landscape designer. A couple of years ago, they took an apartment on a mortgage. And were gradually fixing it up. The couple had been trying for over a year to have a child. Both were ready to take on the role of parents. But nothing worked. Even though they had already had some tests done. And everything was normal. They did not want to take any drastic steps. So they just kept hoping that someday they would finally get lucky. Ruslan had a good friend whose name was Andrew. The man, unlike his companion, was lonely and lived alone. He did not have much luck in relationships. At some point, he had already accepted this state of affairs. And stopped busting his neck to get acquainted with anyone. He was comfortable enough as it was. They had met in high school and had been in touch ever since. As adults, they didn't see each other that often. But when they did meet, it was as if they hadn't been together all that time. One afternoon, Andrew was going about his business. And decided to walk through the park. His head was occupied with the repairs he was making. So he hardly paid any attention to those who passed him by. Suddenly, he stumbled over some rock in the middle of the path. And it snapped him out of his heap of thoughts. He glanced around to see if anyone had noticed his fall. When suddenly, he spotted a familiar silhouette ahead. He stepped a little closer and recognized her. It was Sophia, his friend's wife. She was walking in the company of a man. "Sonia, hello?" shouted Andrew, walking a little closer. The woman turned around. "Andrew, hello. I didn't expect to see you here." The man had already held out his hand to her companion to say hello. "Andrei Kostia." At that moment, the woman tensed a little. She bit her lip and then said with a laugh. "This is my brother. He came to town for the day. Here to give us a tour. We're really in a bit of a hurry, sorry." Andrew replied that it was no big deal. He asked him to say hello to Ruslan. And then they said goodbye. He stared intently at Konstantin's face. Something tensed him in the whole situation. It was either Sanja's reaction or her hurry. For a second, he even thought there was far from a kinship between these two. But the telephone call from a client distracted him, pushing the man's doubts away. In the flow of events and working moments, Andrew had completely forgotten about the situation in the park. He was not even surprised at the absence of a call from Ruslan. Usually, if he said hello to him through his acquaintances, he considered it his duty to call and meet him. But the friend did not show up until a few months later. One evening, Ruslan dialed his comrade and informed him in a joyful voice that soon he would finally become a father. You know, nothing much had happened before that. And here is the real news and I decided to share it with you. Andrew sincerely congratulated his friend. He knew how long he and his wife had come to this. At the end of the year, in the winter, Ruslan even invited him to the maternity hospital to be discharged. Afterward, they sat together for a while and celebrated. Later, there was a lull. The couple fully immersed themselves in taking care of the baby. The world began to revolve around him. From time to time, they would write to each other. But for the most part, Ruslan was immersed in his work to provide his family with everything they needed. They had not seen each other for over a year. And one day on his day off, Andrew was passing through the neighborhood where his comrade lived. He had to pick up an order at the pickup point, which was in their house. And by happy coincidence, he met Ruslan in the street. He was strolling along with the stroller. Andre shouted at him and he gestured for him to keep his voice down. The child dozed off. It turned out that his wife had sent him for a walk with his son and wanted to relax and unwind. The friends were talking. Andrew looked at the little boy and asked if he could tell what the child looked like. He looked more like his mother. He didn't take anything from me as if he didn't like it, apparently. He made a joke. My friend did not appreciate the joke. He suddenly remembered seeing his wife with some stranger whom she introduced as her brother. And this was not long before the news of the pregnancy. I'm sorry, don't take this the wrong way, but have you ever considered that the baby might not be yours? Andre asked seriously. Ruslan looked at him like he was crazy. He laughed and asked why he suddenly thought so. A friend snapped and decided to tell him that he had seen his wife with someone in the park at the time. After that, Ruslan was not so cheerful anymore. Well, hello? She certainly didn't tell me from you. She didn't say that she saw you at all. And your brother? Kostya, you say? She doesn't have any brothers and I don't remember any cousins. He said thoughtfully. And she certainly did not tell me that any of her relatives visited her at that time. This news shook Ruslan. He still felt euphoric that he finally had his heir. Besides, he had always found that he and his wife had a good relationship. But now doubts about his wife's faithfulness had settled in his mind. Yes, and at a time when they were ready to give up, and she suddenly became pregnant. At that time, Ruslan thought it was a miracle. But now everything was covered with a shroud of doubt. He thanked his friend for telling him about the incident, even though it was so much later. That night, he had waited for his wife's return more anxiously than ever before. He knew there was a serious talk to be had. As he waited for her, sitting in complete silence in the kitchen, he went over in his head all the suspicious things that he might in the past have simply turned a blind eye to. When their next attempt to have a baby failed, he felt at one point as if his wife had grown cold to the idea altogether. She didn't say she'd changed her mind, but you could feel it in the look on her face. Then there was even some coldness between them. But Ruslan put it down to hormonal background. The man decided to call his mother-in-law and find out from the source whether there was a certain Constantine among his wife's brothers after all. He veiled this strange question by saying that a certain man came to their house when Sonia was away and introduced himself as her brother. Our fears had already been confirmed. There was no such man among her cousins or even third cousins. When the man hung up, Sonia had just returned home. After she had checked on the baby, the man decided to start a conversation. He began from afar, mentioning Kostya, who had recently dropped in on her as if to visit. Ruslan decided not to specify the degree of their relationship and just watched her reaction. Sonia did not make eye contact. She constantly looked away. When the man's name came up, it was as if she tensed up. But she tried not to show it. Do you know him, dear? Her husband asked in a calm tone. Yes, he's a former colleague. And what did he want? Pronounced Sonia. He wanted to see his child. The husband decided to go along with the provocation. Sonia went dramatically pale and didn't blink for a couple of seconds. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish on dry land. Ruslan decided to squeeze her. So he's right, isn't he? You didn't cheat with him, did you? It seems time to do a paternity test. His words thundered to his wife. Then she tried to pull herself together. I've been agonizing for hours to give you a son. And you're doing this to me. She howled. Well, if it really is my baby, what do you have to worry about? Her husband said calmly. The expression on the woman's face was as if she were ready to burst with anger. Forgetting about the sleeping baby, she started yelling at her husband for trying to avoid responsibility for the baby like a coward. She threatened that now she would go to her mother and Ruslan would never see her again. Then she tearfully began packing her belongings. The expertise made it clear that the baby was not Ruslan after all. After that, he and Sonia scandalously divorced. The man was both angry and depressed by this news. He had already managed to get used to the role of the father, attached to this little lump of happiness. All this time, Andra had been by Ruslan's side and supported him in this difficult period. Sonia went to her parents. By then, she had long been out of touch with her lover. But now, feeling vulnerable, she tried to resume communication with him. But Kostya himself was not eager to do so. He already had his own family and he did not care about Sonia. So, in an attempt to deceive her husband, the woman lost her own game. Such is the story. Share in the comments what you think about this situation and the behavior of the characters. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, I've got a shocking and intense story to share with you. She would put on her underwear and run home to hide her secret from her husband. But what was the secret? Today, we will tell you life stories and accounts of how wives are forced to use different ways to take pity on their husbands. Are you ready to find out the truth? I want to tell you a very ambiguous story, although some might not call it ambiguous. It was about a kiss, and you can say 100 years ago, which resulted in a worse than nuclear war. To help you understand the whole picture, I am 40 years old, my wife Elizabeth 36, and of course, has a child 10 years old. Everything is fine with money and so on. The beginning of the whole story, if of course, you can believe my dear wife, was one evening on February 23rd. Our colleagues in the organization and I, of course, congratulated each other. A little by the evening, we celebrated the whole thing in the workplace. The girls at work set the table for us. I call my wife. Liz, we are here. Well, this is the very little. If you have a chance, after work, come straight here for me. We'll celebrate here a little bit. Well, you can pick me up and drive, so I don't have to leave my car here. I'm good. If I'd known how this simple request of mine would end, I wouldn't have drank at all, and I would have picked up whoever and wherever I wanted at once. Long or short, the dinners at work that night were also a humbling event. They were there too, congratulating the staff. In general, we had more bottles of cognac that evening than expected, and some of our young people here began to play the bottle. Well, like young people play, and we are older just for fun. We are sitting. Anyway, I think it's time to write to my wife. Where are you? She's texting me. I'm getting in a cab. I'll be right there. Okay. I take some more cognac, stand closer to the exit. There's a window, at least to get some air, and the sleeves on my shirt, of course, are already rolled up. Mine and everyone else's is fine. All of a sudden, one of our youngest madams comes up, and she calls me by my name and patronymic. Anyway, there's that bottle there pointed at me, and she kind of has to kiss me here, and in general, not really expecting an answer from me, takes my chin right with 2 hands and kisses me, without taking away from me and turning her head to the staff. Well, sort of, so that they can see that she has completed this task. Well, as you have already realized, of course, at this point, my wife walks in as well. Oil painting. We're kind of standing there with this madam, just the two of us. It all looks like we stepped away from the collective for some business. We both smell of alcohol. Well, the last moments of the kiss, I think the wife saw perfectly well too. I pretended as if nothing had happened. There really wasn't anything going on. I had nothing to do with it, but it wasn't. While Lisa and I, my wife and I were in the car, we were talking as if nothing had happened. In fact, I figured we'd probably talk tomorrow, if we talked at all, and for nothing. The next day, my wife was already blacker than a cloud. I somehow explained to her what it was, and after a couple of days, she, kind of believed me. I exhaled, but it turned out far from that. A month goes by to 6 months, and every time, on occasion, and without it, my wife immediately reminds me of this case, and because of these reminders, fight more. I told her if she did not forgive me, she could have told me so, instead of forgiving at first, and then reminding me every day. As soon as I said that, and got really angry, she immediately took a step back, saying that she was kidding, and that she would relax. But if the quarrel again, she immediately reminds me of it all again. In short, found a string, how to act on the nerves. Here, so to speak, as it is impossible, I turned out to her something like a promotion. She had been working in a jewelry store, and after an employee in their larger office went on maternity leave, Elizabeth was offered the job. The neighborhood was a little farther from home, but the pay was higher, and so on. I generally agreed without asking me, and the schedule was from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., and the schedule was 3 days through 3. I, by the way, paid attention at once. It was the first time I had ever heard of such a schedule, but later found out what kind of schedule, what hobbies, except work, there were dinners. Anyway, it's been a year and a half, and then she walks into our lounge in the evening, and says, I'm sick of it all. At first I thought the conversation was about work. You don't give me any time or attention at all. Well, don't make promises that you will now. You're an adult, you can't be changed. I've made up my mind, I've been thinking for a long time. In short, the point is that I have to go out now. Of course, I'm shocked. The next day, I try to talk again, and she is not, all in the same spirit. Torture my presence. To cut a long story short, I was not going to torture anyone. I decided to go to a friend's house for a couple of weeks at their empty house. It happens that people get bored with each other, and as a result, we make up. But it turned out to be much more interesting. We are sitting with a friend at this dacha, and with his encouragement, we come to the conclusion that there is something for a reason. It has been a week and a half. The wife, in terms of communication, doesn't even scratch the surface. Yes, and crowned, we need a break from each other. In such stories usually means something else. Anyway, I think, did someone show up? My friend definitely thinks so. And in my brain, at once her surface is scheduled 3 days and 3. Long or short, it looks like she has someone. And that someone is connected to her at this exact time. 3 days and 3, from 9 in the morning until 8 at night. What to do? I called the next day at my wife's to talk. But no, she stayed in the position she was in. We'll take a break from each other, but we'll decide sometime later too. Yeah, sure. But anyway, there's nothing to do. I take my friend's car, and drive right up to the driveway at 8 in the morning, so I can actually see where she's going and when. She gets out in the morning, jumps in a cab, and goes to this job of hers. I walk her there, driving to mine. Then in the evening, I decide to go to her place again, and see who will give her a ride home from work tonight. Well, if she got a ride. But then the situation repeats itself again. I can't follow my wife around indefinitely. I am also at work. In fact, there is no evidence. I have no guarantees that this is not nothing, and I do not do nonsense. In short, again, we are sitting at the cottage with a friend. And it has been almost a month. I come to our house and see my son. But Elizabeth doesn't say yes or no. I wouldn't want to talk about it now. Let's get through these days. And then we'll see what and where it takes us. Okay, imagine what I have to do. I mean, there's no reason to get divorced. But it's not a life together under these conditions either. But fortunately, this epic is still over. This same friend calls me and asks the address of the salon where his wife works. Listen, he said, it's all so cool and big. Where is it located? I need to buy a gift certificate. And while I'm there, maybe out of your tears, I'll talk to you. I gave him that address, the phone number. He called me back 2 hours later and told me his wife wasn't there. 2 counselors are there and no one from the bosses. But it's probably not her shift. I tell him, but my heart is restless. I take the car and go to the house. I come home and there is no one at home. Where is she then? I call her, she doesn't answer. I call her parents and she's not there either. The time had already come for the evening. I get in the car, go to her work, drove up, stood far away, waited. 8 p.m. comes up. I see Lisa coming out of the salon. And there's a guy next to her looking maybe 20 or 25. They go to his bad weather expensive and honest stamp. And in fact, they get in. I will not describe my emotions. They were contradictory. Well, on the one hand, at least I knew that my suspicions were not groundless. Well, on the other hand, I wanted to go out and ask questions directly. But luckily, I held back at the time. As it turned out, rightly so. I'm sitting here wondering where, in fact, they're going. They drove home. He dropped her off in front of our driveway and left. I immediately picked her up, parked my car right there and went straight up to our house. Opened the door with my key. She was already on her phone with someone. I took the cell phone out of her hand. And while it was unlocked, I went to her message. For this month, while she's been out here, let's say walking around. Apparently, my return wasn't really expected. So all the messages with this young, handsome guy, she did not delete at all. Anyway, I read everything in there. It turns out that in this main office, there is a management office. And this boy is actually, well, he's the son of one of the executives of this network. That's actually why you don't see him going up to her house. They had an office right at work for that. Now I see. That's actually why my friend today, when he came to the jewelry store, he didn't find Lisa at her workplace. The work must have been done in the office. Anyway, I didn't see any tears or sobs that night. She didn't really deny it. On the contrary, she finally told me all the things they'd been thinking about me for the past 2 years. Of course, they remembered that kissed on February 23rd, adding that that was just the tip of the iceberg. And supposedly, there's a bunch more betrayals behind me that she's sure she won't remember and figure out. That's it. Like I said, the whole situation is ambiguous. Somebody could say, it's your own fault. It was you on February 23rd kissed that lady. But I don't think that's a big deal. And it's a damn good excuse. And it's not a good excuse on February 23rd. He always thought his wife was just going to beauty salon treatments to keep her skin in shape. But when he happened to notice intimate treatments being performed right outside their apartment windows. But what he found out made him lose his head and raise a ruckus that all the neighbors in their building remembered. I want to tell you a truly detective story, witnesses and even participants, which happened to be myself. Saturday evening, I received a phone call from a friend of mine. Where are you? What are you? How are you? Let's see you. We can even talk at my house. Or better yet, let's meet at the store first. I think that without the store, we will not make it here. All right. I got ready, got in a cab and went to my friend's place. Anyway, after a short conversation, it turned out that he and his wife had had another fight. For the 10th or 20th time this month, I asked him approximately yes. And where is she now? I don't know. Turns out they've been having it for a month now. And each time, in order not to make the situation worse, Andrew goes to his office so that he and his wife alone would blow off steam, cool off. And he goes back to their house the next day or every other day. And little by little, everything kind of calms down. But after a while, it's all over again. He leaves the house again. Of course, they disconnect their phones from each other at these moments. And this has been going on for about 5 weeks now. And then it coincided with the weekend. So what do I tell him? And that I did not really want to ruin the weekend today, says Andre. But no matter how hard I tried, we still had a fight. I kind of left again. But then I decided to talk right away and make things work out. Call her. Her phone is off. Came home a couple of hours later. She's not home. Get it? Yeah. So we sat down with him for a while, finished what we brought from the store. It's outside. But for a second, it's almost 4 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting there feeling that we were starting to sober up a little bit. We had a last drink of tea. And I said I was going home. Otherwise, yours will come. And we are sitting in this kind of well condition. Moreover, that you have already quarreled, not very much it will look from the outside. Although to return to her husband only in the morning is also not very from the outside. Okay, that's it. Let's go. We said goodbye. I threw on my jacket and went downstairs. Standing near their doorway. It's a little cold. It's early spring. I got out on purpose and didn't call a cab. I thought I would take a walk, get some air, have a smoke, but then I would go. I looked and there was no lighter in my pocket. I searched all my pockets, and there was definitely no lighter. It seems to be on Andre's balcony. And those back to his third floor. The last thing I wanted now. Moreover, I look out the window. The light at Andrew is not lit. Probably asleep. Okay. And I see in their yard in front of Andrew's new house. There is a car with the lights on and parked in the so-called second row. But it means kind of came recently. And for sure there is someone inside. I come up in the back. I see the front window as ajar. I said, buddy, they're gonna be lighters. He reached for the ceiling light in the car and turned on the interior light. I'm standing outside in the dark and can't see me. I can see the cabin with the lights on pretty well. No one in the passenger seat. It's pushed all the way forward. I hear a lady's voice coming from the back seat. She said to my date. Okay, y gotta go. I'll call you. And she kissed the driver on the cheek. I leaned over to look and the lady had already opened kind of the back door, but also kind of on her way out. I looked closer. It's Marinka. I think it's Andrea. I immediately turned my back to them. I hear her get out of the car, slam the back door. Well, and goes to his entrance home. That's right. The driver couldn't find a lighter, started the car and told me that yes, now the cigarette lighter. I was sobered up by such surprises from Marinka. And I thought that I should make friends with this friend. I wonder if it's a brother or some colleague at work. And now I'll take Andrew. Although why would she then was a colleague to kiss something? Okay. I hear it. And his car chain noise. Well, when he started the car, I could hear it under the hood. And I said to him, that's the chain. They have a problem area. Yes, we allegedly when we worked in the service in the non-existent, when we came often on these, the owners often thought that the matter was moving towards a full-blown engine overhaul, but it turned out not. He tells me yes. And I was getting kind of wary too. So back and forth, we talked a little bit. I said, that's it. I should go home. It's time. Which way are you going now? He told me the direction. I told him I was going that way too. Let's go. Let's go. Do you mind if I sit in the back? They're going to stop the smell of alcohol and all that. Okay. I get in the back. I see the front passenger seat is definitely in an unnatural position for him. It's too far forward. Anyway, we're driving along. We're talking. I'm telling him about his date. Pretty girl, you know, got a girlfriend. He says she's got a lot of things. Are we laughing? Okay. I run my left hand over the back seat. And I feel like there's nothing there. I look and we're pretty far gone. I think it's time for me to get out too. Okay. There's a junction coming up. I tell him. And after the stop, I came all turned on my phone flashlight. I look in on the floor directly behind the driver's seat is a hairbrush. Obviously not a man's, but I think let it be evidence. If everything is confirmed and if it doesn't, I'll call and I'll give it back. We exchanged phone numbers with the driver. He said if there was a problem with the engine, he could call. I went out and called my friend to whom the wife returned in the morning. Andrew did not pick up the phone. I took a cab back to the house. The next day, Andrew called back himself, but there was no sensation. I told him about how last night I had fun investigating the alleged cheating and that I even have proof of a sort, but it turned out that Marinka herself took and told him I got home at about 5 o'clock in the morning. Andrew could there in an unsuitable state for such a conversation. In short, as a result, they and his friends, all what they think and everything as it is said, that's pretty much it. The only really unpleasant thing about this story is that there is no consistency. First, they should have broken up and then they should have thrown their comms, walking around at least until morning. If you like this story, don't forget to rate it and give it a like. Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. In today's story, OP found out his wife cheated on him after he caught his wife trying to sneak her affair partner into their house. He then confronted the affair partner and things escalated quickly. Little does the wife know that he has been recording and writing down everything she has been doing with her affair partner to set himself up for nice revenge when they go to court. Let's get into the story. She cheated, I'm figuring it out, and it hurts. Hello everyone, I, 34 male, found my wife, 33 female, in our bed with another man. A little background. For the sake of my sanity, I will refer to my wife as Ellie. My best friend's name is Omar, not real names. Ellie and I met in college and hit it off right away. When we started dating, I was not really assertive. You could accurately say that it was her showing interest and desire in me that made me really begin to value myself and work past a ton of insecurities I used to deal with. I was just a hardworking, nerdy, smart dude, but had never had any real luck with women. To me it was almost incredible that someone as smart and beautiful as her would show as much interest in me as I showed in her. We both have always been driven, which led us separately building small businesses of our own by the time we graduated college. We moved in together after graduation and a year later, married. We had, what I considered, a very strong marriage. We had weathered family tragedies, professional challenges, small and large disagreements, and always managed to work through everything, and I felt it always made us stronger. Ellie has always had a huge social circle that included a fair number of men, but I never thought too much about it, as she never did anything that raised flags, since all social outings seemed to always be as a large mixed group, and I came to trust her closest friends. As our 10-year anniversary was coming up, I decided to bring up the topic of starting a family. Early on in the relationship, we had together decided to compromise on the size of our family. I wanted kids, she wanted none or at most one, so we agreed on having one. Now, 10 years into our marriage, secure economically, and thinking how healthy I thought our relationship was, I brought the topic up. I can't help but think me doing this may have started this whole chain of events. A little over 3 months ago, she tells me she is going out with her friends to have some fun. She basically told me she needed to unwind, as she was getting stressed about me asking about having kids again. That night, she comes back at 4 a.m. Starting with that day, our bedroom goes completely dead. In our relationship, Ellie has always initiated as much as me, in fact on average I would say more often than me, and for rare periods when we were dealing with traveling, I can't think of us ever going more than 5 days without some form of intimacy. She starts going out more, guarding her phone, avoiding me, all this, stuff I had never seen from her before. After about 3 to 4 weeks of this, I talk to Omar, my best friend, and he points me to Reddit, and I start reading. Eventually, I decide I need to do something about this, as it's beginning to put me in a bad mood. I don't just want to trust her, I like to trust my wife, I need to trust her. Well, needless to say, I get my hands on her phone and check her calls and texts, feeling like a complete monster violating her privacy. Turns out that one of the people new to our social circle is an old high school flame from before we were together. The more I dug, the more I found. I think the fact I'd always trusted her completely made her complacent about hiding the affair better. I found out that during that party a month before, he had attended, and they spent all night catching up, and ended up kissing, not even really hiding it from her whole group of friends and then conveniently going to the bathroom at the same time. Up to this point, all I had felt has been this giant pit of anxiety in my stomach, a part of me trying to hold on to the image of the woman I thought I had married, a kind of self-delusion. But the anger and sadness start getting overwhelming, made worse by the fact that she seems oblivious to my sudden indifference. She didn't notice, I had stopped making romantic gestures, I felt like I was breaking inside. Finally, a month ago, I decided to catch them in the act and I tell Ellie I'm going to visit my cousin for the weekend. He lives 3 hours away, but instead I go stay with Omar who has been helping me record and copy everything. I waited and sure enough, she brought him to our house to our bed. I snuck in the house and made my way to our room and the sounds left no doubts. They were so into it, they didn't notice me standing there at the door recording them with my phone. I literally felt something in me break, like something in my soul snapped so hard I could hear it. My veins went ice cold and something like a 10-ton anvil had been dropped on my chest. I couldn't breathe, I went numb. The next part one can only tell you what Omar says happened because I only remember parts of the next few minutes. According to Omar, who I had brought as a witness, apparently I walked up to them, pulled that guy off of the bed and Omar pulled me off of him. I remember Omar holding me down on the ground. After that, there was the normal hysterics of being caught. I went no contact for 5 weeks and began working with a lawyer preparing for the worst. Omar served as her contact point during that time since I simply didn't want to talk to her. I only contacted my family and told them that we were having problems. After the 5 weeks of no contact, we met and talked. She was remorseful, told me it wasn't my fault, that it was all her doing, her responsibility and her decisions. We decided to go to marriage counseling and at least explore if there is anything salvageable. Sitting here, I can't believe that even after that, I still love her. I'm disgusted with myself that I have thought about her well-being, about her happiness. I especially hate that now I have to question our entire relationship. Was it just now that she got brazen about cheating, or has it happened before and I didn't bother looking far enough or was too stupidly trusting to see it at all? It's now been almost a month since deciding to try marriage counseling, and my questions to those who have already gone through this are the following. 1. Is it possible to reconcile without feeling that you lose some self-respect? 2. How long does the anger to sadness to numbness, rinse and repeat cycle last? I'm getting exhausted at the constant emotional roller coaster. 3. I find myself really loathing the whole idea of having to essentially be on the constant lookout. Is that a sign of me wanting out or just me being exhausted, because I honestly can't tell? I'll take any advice, honestly. I love her. I've been head over heels for her since we met back in college. I want to work it out. Is it actually possible? And if it is, will it ever resemble what it used to be even remotely? TLDR, wife cheated, trying to reconcile but have a lot of fears and questions. After reading everyone's replies and the messages, I took the weekend to let it all sink in and harden my resolve. I came to the conclusion that I was never going to be able to live with myself if I stayed with her. Staying and working on it would mean having to sacrifice a significant portion of my self-respect. I also realized that I want no part of a relationship that would require me to be in a state of constant vigilance for signs of betrayal. So I decided to push the proverbial red button and nuke it all. Here's how it all went down. Monday, I woke up early to an unexpected surprise. When I opened my eyes, my Johnson was greeting me at full attention. Guys, I can't stress how surprising that was to me, considering that since finding out about Ellie's affair, I had not had morning wood. It was like my body was saying, hell yeah, we are going to get this done today and be done, ready for something new. I actually laughed so hard at seeing it that Omar and his wife came to check in on me thinking I was having some sort of mental breakdown. I got up, got ready, and called Ellie's dad and told him we needed to talk. I met with him about an hour before our marriage counseling. The whole drive there I was surprised at how calm I was about it. I could still feel an ocean of emotions somewhere deep down, but on the surface, I was not feeling anything. We met up at a little mom and pop breakfast place near his house and we sat down. Ellie's dad is a good man, light-hearted and funny, but more importantly, he is level-headed. I thanked him for how he and his wife had treated me all these years and told him I was sorry to have this talk with him. He listened patiently, but as I started telling him why I was going to be divorcing his daughter, he lowered his head. I could tell he was ashamed and angry, not at me, but at Ellie. He told me he understood, and I asked him to not tell Ellie as I was going to be telling her within the hour. He agreed, we shook hands, and then he told me to take care. I hated having to shatter his image of her. I debated with myself if I should have asked him to care for her, but I shouted down that instinct because he is her dad. Of course he will care for her, but also it is no longer my business to care for her. She is a big girl. Next, I went to our scheduled marriage and counseling session. I had been rehearsing all day Sunday what I would say to her and how I would say it. I wanted to essentially emotion-proof my actions and words for the next few hours. I sat there in the parking lot for 10 minutes and just prayed. I hadn't felt like I wanted to or could since all this started. When we sat down for marriage counseling, Ellie was wearing one of the dresses I loved her in, and for a split second, I forgot everything, but then the visceral disgust and anger I felt pushed the attraction completely out. I let the counselor get things going like our previous sessions, and after about 10 minutes of her and Ellie talking, I interrupted. This is how it went. Excuse me, I have a few things I need to say to Ellie, and that I wanted to be able to say here with a neutral third party. If at any point I am interrupted, I will simply leave, and that's that. Ellie, I have come to realize I do not need to know if this was the only time you cheated. It doesn't matter. I do not need to know how long it went for. It doesn't matter. I do not need to know how many times you cheated. It doesn't matter. I do not need to know why. Even if there was a good reason, a perfectly why, it also would not matter. The only thing that matters is that you did. I know now the only facts that matter. You were never going to have children with me. At this, Ellie opens her mouth to interject, and I started walking to the door, so she immediately backed off. You were going to string me along for however it would take. You were going to cheat on me sooner or later. This is when the waterworks started to open up for her. You do not respect me or love me. The counselor begins to look like she is about to interject, and I respond by taking another step toward the door, which ends that. My lawyer is filing for divorce as we sit here, and as of about an hour ago, your father knows the entire truth of what has been going on. Do not contact me. From here on out, the only person we will communicate through are lawyers. These are the last words we will ever exchange. Goodbye. I walked the last few steps to the door and walked out. As soon as I closed the door, I heard a wail, the likes of which would haunt people's dreams. She scrambled out of the office pursuing me and tried to stop me, telling me how sorry she is and how we can start a family and to give her a second chance, and she cried hysterically throughout. I pushed past her and got in my car and left. At this point, that ocean of emotions that had been quietly hiding underneath it all started roiling, and I was barely holding it in. I drove to my parents' house and sent the text message I had planned to Ellie's best friend's husband. When I got home, my old man was at the store, but Mom could tell I wasn't well. She has always been able to read me like a book. I told her I needed to tell her and Dad something important, and we sat down and waited. At this point, I have to thank Responsible Mode 114 for messaging me, which added and he totally calmed me down. About 30 minutes later, Dad arrived. I poured it all out. The more I talked, the more I felt that ocean of emotions emptying and all that pain pouring out of me. When I finished talking to my dad, he just held me as I cried into his shirt for a solid 20 minutes. When it all ended, I felt spent and oddly at peace. I have arranged for Omar to receive a Harley he has been eyeing for a while. He has been more than a friend to me and I'm going to try my best to be as good a friend to him as he has been to me. I can't wait to see his face. I think this is the last time I will post as it should be the end of this story. I just want to thank you all. Would have never thought that I would find sound and sane advice from strangers on the internet. I know that it will be a long road ahead, that I will still need individual counseling to deal with the aftershocks of this debacle and rebuild my ability to trust. I have to hope that little by little, all this pain and sadness and anger will go away. Like Roto-Rooter for my soul if I do the work. Now begins the rest of my life and I can honestly say I am looking forward to it. Wow OP, the way you handled the situation was outstanding. Kudos to you. You dropped the bomb right in the middle of your counseling session with her, which is even more epic. The good thing is that now the worst days are behind you and from here on out, it will get better. As you mentioned, your wife simply wanted her cake and to eat it too, which explains why she came crying and chasing after you like a lost puppy after you told her your intentions. Best of luck to you in the future OP. Let's see what the comments had to say about this situation. Armor Teague 227 said, my dude, you handled yourself like a boss and with class and self-control, and not only confronting her at marriage counseling but taking the initiative and holding her accountable not only to her cheating but that she no longer would hostage your heart and soul. And in the very place where many in your position as a man the narrative would spin in her favor, you took control not only from your ex but the therapist as well. This was your true therapy. You took the steps in reclaiming your life back. I couldn't be more proud, my man. I know it hurts right now because taking down that wall when crumbling is draining, but you will survive this. You will rebuild to be something new, stronger, more powerful, and I guarantee you this is the moment where your life begins again. Congrats to you, man. It might not feel like a victory, but you have just laid the gauntlet down for a better world than yourself, brick by brick. You will find happiness again. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more shocking stories. Welcome to another Reddit video. This story is called, Wife Caught Cheating After 18 Years. I have never been to one of these forums, and I don't know if this will even help me, but I just recently found out that my wife of 18 years was cheating on me with one of her wealthy clients. She is an attorney. My wife went through great lengths to try and hide her affair. But, she made one crucial mistake. She forgot to delete the destinations in the car. When using the navigation system, they told me where she went and I took screenshots of all of it. And I had another gadget in her car. Once I found out, I didn't say anything. I wanted to get more concrete proof. I am a trust fund baby. So, I have access to money and I hired a very good private investigator. I put the private investigator on a retainer. I was sort of pay him as he gathered the evidence I needed. I had to be very careful because if my wife found out I was onto her, she would have become even more secretive and I may have never found out the truth. So, as the weeks went by, I never said anything to her. My demeanor didn't change. I acted like everything was normal. But, all the while I was getting more and more evidence of her affair. To top this all off, she is a divorce attorney. So, she knows all the tricks in the book to try and hide assets and to make sure she comes out on top in a divorce. But, little does she know, I have been planning my own little surprise for her. My private investigator was really good at getting surveillance footage of my wife cheating with this client of hers. He's very wealthy and he has a lot of power. But, what my wife didn't know is that I have been secretly recording her conversations with this man for a few weeks. I placed a very tiny voice-activated recorder in her car without her knowledge. Even though I am a trust fund baby, I was a mechanic at one time and I told her one day that I was going to clean her car and get the oil changed. That's when I placed a voice-activated recorder in her car. One of the most heartbreaking things I heard, she gave him oral in the back seat of her car. I thought to myself, I would never initiate kissing her again, never, but I still had to play dumb. Like I didn't know anything. A few more weeks went by and I had more than enough evidence to confront her with, but I wanted to wait for the right time. I was still unsure if I even wanted to confront her. I also secretly hired a moving company to come and move all of my stuff out of our house while she was at work. I didn't want any type of confrontation with her. I wanted to be long gone before she even got home from work. That day, she called and said she would be working late. When she told me that I said, okay, I love you. I will see you later. After getting off the phone, I called my private investigator and told him that my wife said she was working late. My private investigator said, okay, I will tell her and see what she is really up to. A few hours went by and I get a call from my private investigator. He said, well, it seems like your wife is not working late. She is currently at a hotel with her client. I told him to stay there and get as much evidence as possible. I wanted to be 100% sure before I took any kind of action. The private investigator said, okay, no problem. A few hours went by, the private investigator sent me a video clip of them walking into the room with her client's hand squeezing my wife's ass. I sent the private investigator a text telling him he doesn't need to stay there any longer. That's all the evidence I needed. After that, I continued packing my things while the moving company continued moving my furniture. It wasn't much. I had made arrangements to move into one of my vacation homes that I rent out every year, which was partially furnished. At about 4 p.m., my wife calls me and says she will be home in an hour or two. I told her, okay, and hung up the phone. I told the movers we had about an hour left, and I told them the address of the vacation home. They were done about 40 minutes later. I gave them the key and they headed to the house. I locked my old house, set the alarm and got in my car. My movers and I get to the vacation home. When my phone rings, it's my wife. She says she wants me to meet her at our favorite restaurant. I said, why? She says, I have something to tell you. I get to the restaurant and my wife is already there. She's sitting in a booth. I sit down and she looks at me and she has this weird look on her face. She finally says, I'm pregnant. I was in shock. I didn't know what to say. I told her, are you sure? It's mine. She looks at me funny and says, why would you say that? I look at her, take out my phone, show her the video clip of her and her client walking into the hotel room with her client, squeezing her ass. Then I told her, I know you were cheating on me. And I know you gave this client of yours oral in the back seat of your car. We can do this one of two ways. We can settle this out of court, or we can go to court and you will probably get demolished with all of the evidence I have. She didn't say a word for about a minute. Then she looks at me and says she will take her chances in court. All I said was, okay, got up and left. The following day, I conferred with a divorce attorney, showed him the evidence and told him to start the divorce process. That same day, she must have called my phone 1,000 times. Remember the day I left her at our favorite restaurant? She went home and found that I had moved out and bombarded my phone that day as well. But, I never responded to her. A few weeks later, my divorce attorney said that she was served with the divorce papers and all that's left now is the hearing. A few weeks after that, I get a call from her asking me to meet her for coffee. So I did. She asked me how I was doing and I said, I'm doing just fine. Thank you. Then she asked me if I would consider dropping the divorce. And I said, no. I told her, I can't trust you anymore. After 18 years of marriage, you decide to cross the line with the client and you want me to take you back. I'm sorry, but I can't do that. She begged and pleaded with me, even offered to give up her privacy and let me have access to everything. A few weeks later, I get a call from her again, saying she wants to meet for coffee. So, I met her again. This time she wanted to know if I would give her another chance. She kept saying, please, please, please. And I said, why? What benefit do I get? If I decided to give you another chance, she looked at me with this pitiful look on her face and said, because I love you. I just sat there looking at her for what seemed like an eternity. Then I got up and left. A few days later, I received a package in the mail from her. It contained a box of my favorite cigars and a note that said, I'm sorry. I thought about it for a few days and decided that I just couldn't do it. I had tears rolling down my face. I just couldn't see myself with her. She threw away 18 years for a client that she knew for only a month. I can't think or write anymore at this point. I am too mentally distraught. I promise I will come back with an update on my situation. This story is called Update Wife Caught Cheating After 18 Years. Hello. I am back with a quick update. My divorce isn't final yet. My wife asked me to give her another chance. She begged and pleaded with me after I showed her proof that I knew she was cheating on me. She has since asked me multiple times. Have I considered giving her another chance in my head? I said, I couldn't, but I just haven't told her yet. I don't think I can trust her, but I had a funny feeling. She was still cheating. So with my gut instinct, I called my private investigator and told him I wanted him to continue to follow her. A week goes by. He calls me and tells me he has not seen her with that client. She goes to work and goes home. He also tells me that when he follows her home, he stays for about 30 to 40 minutes to see if she leaves the house. According to him, she hasn't. Fast forward 3 weeks and my private investigator follows my wife home and he waited for 30 minutes. Then out of nowhere, he sees a car drive down to the house. He's never seen this car before. It's the guy she has been cheating with. He sends me a clip of this guy walking up to the door. He knocks on the door. My wife opens the door and kisses him. What are you doing, Bill? Can a man drink that much? Lamented neighbor Mrs. Hogreave. She looked reproachfully at Bill, who was like a son to her. I'm in grief, don't you know, Mrs. Hogreave? Bill whispered, crying and swaying at the table with the drink in his unsteady hand. His red swollen eyes looked distracted and vacant, his cheeks and chin were covered with long stubble, which made him look miserable and untidy. Mrs. Hogreave wrinkled her nose. Yes, you are grieving, but she's grieving too. The woman pointed her hand at the little crying girl huddled in the corner of the sofa, and looking from there frightenedly at her father. She may be 100 times more hurt and scared than you are. She's only 6 years old, and not only has her mother died, but her father has turned into a monster. Mrs. Hogreave stood in the middle of the room, her eyes sparkling angrily. She turned to the little girl and spoke to her. Now her voice sounded very soft and gentle. Come with me, Esther. Daddy will come and get you when he gets a little better. Esther immediately responded to her neighbor's affectionate appeal, ran up to her and wrapped her little arms around her. Her little eyes looked hopefully at the kind elderly woman. And you, Bill, get yourself cleaned up and stop drinking. Esther will stay with me for a while. And remember, you are the most dear person in the world to her now, and you have to think about her first now, and not about how you're hurt and miserable. Mrs. Hogreave took the girl and left. There was an oppressive silence in the house. Bill's hand reached for his glass, but he suppressed that impulse. Mrs. Hogreave is right. It is necessary to live at least for Esther. The man collapsed face down on the sofa and tried to forget himself in an anxious sleep. Before his eyes, as on a film, flew all his family life. Here is his beloved Helen, beautiful and happy in her wedding dress. She happily tells him, you and I are going to live happily ever after. And then suddenly a very recent picture came to mind in which she, pale, exhausted by illness, with a headscarf on her head, was speaking again. But now her voice sounded quiet and sad. You should take care of her, Esther. Don't leave her. Bill shuddered at these memories and cried again, this time of great shame in front of his wife for not coping. A few days later, he, clean-shaven and sober, stood on Mrs. Hogreave's doorstep. Hello, I've come for Esther, he said with excitement. Oh, you have come to your senses. The older woman looked at him sternly over her glasses. Well, come in, but you need to wait. I've put Esther to bed after lunch. She needs daytime sleep now more than ever. So you and I will drink tea meanwhile. I have baked donuts with her. Thank you, Mrs. Hogreave, for shaking me up. They sat at the table and talked quietly, reminiscing while little Esther was sleeping, curled up on the old couch. That's how my son used to sleep, Mrs. Hogreave said, looking at the girl. He was so cute. And then he had an accident at work. It was like I lost my meaning in life. I didn't know why I live, why I work. You are luckier than me, Bill. Look, there's the meaning of your life, sleeping on the couch. Esther woke up exactly 1 hour later. As soon as she opened her eyes, she immediately rushed off the couch and jumped on her father's lap. She happily stroked his shaven cheek, saying, Daddy, my daddy is back. At this point, I would like, of course, to say that everything had settled down. But that would not be quite true. Sometimes Bill would get depressed again, and he would drink again. And once again, Mrs. Hargreave would take Esther to her place for a couple of days. Time went by. Esther went to school. She studied well, and Mrs. Hargreave was always ready to help if Bill suddenly went out of order for a few days. And then one day, Bill brought a woman home. Daughter, meet Paula. She's going to live with us, and I hope you'll be friends with her. A beautiful tall woman looked at the girl, slightly squinting her eyes and smiling. She was as bright as a candy wrapper, and Esther smiled at her. Finally, Daddy will be happy. He will stop drinking and crying at night, thought the little girl. And she was right. Her father adored his new wife. But her relationship with Paula did not work out. Everything was fine in front of her father. Paula was usually smiling and talking affectionately to the girl. But when he was away, she literally abused the child. Esther could not understand why her stepmother hated her so much. Not a day went by that Paula did not scold or humiliate her. The girl said nothing to her father. She thought that if Paula left, her father would get sick again, and he would start drinking and crying at night. Noticing that her stepdaughter unrequitedly accepts all the abuse, the woman became brazen and sometimes began to beat Esther for the smallest mischief. Each time, the slaps grew stronger and more painful. "What is this?" asked Bill once, noticing a bruise on the daughter's arm. But Esther only lowered her eyes to the floor, hiding her tears, and said that she had fallen accidentally. She saw her stepmother looking at her triumphantly and haughtily, standing at the window and folding her arms across her chest. After that incident, Paula, remembering how her husband had found bruises on Esther's body, was now smarter and tried to beat her so that no marks were left. The little girl became thin, pale, and cried a lot. But still, she kept hiding the reason from her father. Then Bill decided to ask his wife about everything. "Paula, there's something wrong with Esther. Maybe she's sick," he suggested. "What's wrong with her? She should be punished. She's rude and lazy, doesn't even wash a cup after herself. She just mocks me. I treat her with all my heart, and she looks at me like a wolf." The whole time, Esther looked at her stepmother with her eyes goggling. She had no idea it was possible to lie like that. Esther said her father sternly, "What's going on? Why don't you listen to Paula? What do you want?" But the girl could not say anything. In shock, her eyes instantly filled with tears. "I want to go to my mummy," she finally shouted and ran to her room and stayed there until morning. It probably would have lasted a long time, or rather, as long as Esther's health could stand. But once again, Mrs. Hargreave intervened. She purposely spotted Bill rushing to work. "Hello, Mrs. Hargreave." The man was pleased to see his neighbor. "You've completely stopped coming to see us. In vain, both me and Esther are really missing you." "Oh, I tried to stop by the other day to get to know your wife and to talk to Esther, but right then I had to go home." "Why?" wondered Bill. "If I tell you, you wouldn't believe me anyway. You'd better come home early from work. Best when Esther comes home from school. You'll see everything with your own eyes." Bill was on his way to work, and his heart was not in the right place. There was something in his neighbor's words that made him uneasy, prevented him from thinking about anything else but what was going on at his house while he was away. Why has a good, obedient girl become frightened, withdrawn and worse at school? Paula says Esther is silly, but she isn't. She's always been praised at school, thought the man. A little later that day, Esther had barely come home from school when her stepmother met her at the door with a wet towel in her hand. "Well, come in, you poor thing," she hissed threateningly. "So, you want to go to your mother? Well, I'll give you such an opportunity. She's probably waiting for you there, you ungrateful little wretch." She slapped the girl on the back with a wet towel with a kind of rage. Esther cried, screaming in pain. "Stop it at once." Suddenly heard Bill's voice from the threshold. He decided to take his neighbor's advice after all, and what he saw made his hands shake. "Bill, darling, I didn't do it on purpose. She just drove me crazy. Let's give her to your mother or to an orphanage. It's not my fault." "I don't know why she makes me so angry," shouted Paula. "Are you crazy? An orphanage? I'll put you in jail. I never thought you were capable of such a thing." Bill rushed to his daughter. "Honey, tell me where it hurts. Forgive me, my little one." Esther hugged her father tightly around the neck and cried loudly. All the tears she had not cried for all that time were rolling out of her eyes in a hail of tears. Mrs. Hargreave quietly entered the room and looked with unconcealed contempt and hatred at Paula, who was packing her suitcase. "People like you should be imprisoned or isolated from society for life," she said to Esther's stepmother. But the woman only smirked in response. "It's not my duty to take care of other women's children." "So why did you marry him? You knew he had a daughter, didn't you?" resented the elderly woman. "Are you really that silly?" "I just thought I'd eventually persuade Bill to put the girl in a boarding school." "Get out," shouted the man, still continuing to hold the girl close to him. "Otherwise, I'm not responsible for myself." Paula, with her head held high, rattling her 2 suitcases, walked away. Bill held Esther in his arms for a long time, saying, "Forgive me, my dear, that I didn't see or hear anything. You've been through so much. Remember, you must always tell me if you have something that worries you. I'm your daddy, and I'll do anything to make you happy. You're my joy, you're my life, and I love you more than anything in the world. And I love you very, very much, Daddy." A child psychologist worked with Esther for a long time afterward, and now the girl is fine. Bill did not marry again after this incident. It was enough for him once. He says that his daughter is dearer to him than anyone else in the world. And Mrs. Hargreaves is still helping them in the neighborhood. After that, I sent my wife a text and told her, I will not give her another chance. I will see you in divorce court. As of May 21st, 2022, I don't have a date for my divorce hearing. That's all I have for now. Thank you. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. At the time this went down 4 months ago, my wife, 35, and I, 33, had been married for 2 years. I was scheduled to go on a 2-day-long business trip, leaving extremely early one day and returning the next day in the evening. Well, after 5 hours of driving, the trip was cancelled. I wasn't terribly bothered because I was used to driving and would be compensated for my time. I decided to return home unexpectedly. When I arrived, I was surprised to see another car parked beside my wife's. It was her brother's car. He was a buff dude, married with a baby that my wife would often babysit. She loved it because she looked forward to becoming a mother. Her and her brother were really close and enjoyed hiking. It didn't matter what the weather was like, all year round they would go on long hiking expeditions together. I didn't mind, it was their thing and I was not an outdoorsy person. I'd usually work a little more or dedicate time to my hobby of building miniature boats. Although I fully supported their relationship, I became a little weary of my wife's brother when he became exceptionally emotional at our wedding and planted a huge kiss on his sister's lips. I couldn't do anything about it, it happened so fast. He asked me to forgive him later, blaming what he did on the high emotions he felt seeing his sister get married and leave the family. When I arrived home and parked behind my wife's car, I could hear slow music playing loudly. It was an odd setting to imagine my wife and brother-in-law in. I didn't have to imagine it because I walked in on them slow dancing together. He was holding her close to his body, their embrace was that of a romantic couple's. When they noticed my presence, they broke apart quickly and looked really guilty. I knew my marriage was in jeopardy by their expressions. My wife tried to say her brother needed emotional support because his marriage was struggling. To me, that did not explain why they were slow dancing in my living room. As hard as it was, I didn't ask them any more questions. They were aware of how odd it looked. I didn't have to wait long before my wife went to go babysit her baby niece one day. She accidentally left her phone behind and I found her WhatsApp. It revealed that she was sexting her brother, sending pictures, saying I love you, and arranging hookups with him by claiming she was going to babysit. It was the most disgusting and disturbing discovery I ever made in my life. I threw her phone and ran to the bathroom to be sick. Everyone always assumed they were really close because they had trouble making friends when they were younger and shared an enthusiasm for hiking that no one else in the family did. I wouldn't confront her about it immediately because it certainly wouldn't have stopped them. I realized that I was just the cover husband so she could have a secret sexual relationship with her blood brother. I went back to her phone as I boiled with anger and betrayal and took screenshots to send to myself. I planned out my revenge, which involved a bit of acting on my part. It was excruciating to see her behave so normally when returned home, like she didn't just hook up with her brother behind my back. I too acted as though everything was normal. I laid awake beside her that night in our marital bed. The very next morning, I hired a PI to get me photos of them. When I announced the truth, she wouldn't be able to wiggle out of the consequences. Not long after, she claimed she was going on a hiking trip with her brother and I played along, notifying the PI. He called me late that night and notified me that she got hotel room with her brother along the beach a few hours away. I started packing my things because it was only a matter of time before I got pictures. I didn't know why they weren't actually hiking together this time, but I didn't care either. At this point, I didn't care about anything and just felt numb. I received pictures of them walking on the beach and boardwalk like newlyweds. His hand on her butt, full kisses on the lips, staring into each other's eyes over drinks at the bar, both of them entering a hotel room, clearly in a romantic relationship. I was ready to leave, but before I left, I invited her immediate and extended family and friends over, including her brother's wife and baby. I printed large copies of the pictures I received and hung them all over the house, starting at the front door. On my way out, I left a note on the door instructing them to let themselves in. Little did they know, I left town for my friend's house with all my belongings and no plans to return. They called me after they entered home, frantically asking me what those pictures were. I spelled it out for them on speakerphone. These 2 members of the family were incestuous freaks that have probably been in a sexual relationship since they lived with their parents. Then I told them where they currently were if they didn't believe me and wanted to see for themselves. Hours later, I got a call from my soon-to-be ex-wife. She was screaming and I could hear the chaos in the background. It became clear that her entire family and a few of her friends had shown up at their hotel. Her brother was being beaten by cousins and the hotel called the police. She asked why I did this to her and I told her she deserved it. She had been living a lie that she wouldn't be able to continue anymore. I told her the divorce papers were on the table and she started wailing, so I hung up. I was hurt enough as it was and didn't want to dwell on how her life would turn out. Her mom called me a few days later to apologize on behalf of her daughter and son. She updated me and said the police never arrived at the hotel, so hotel staff started breaking up the fight themselves. In the chaos, the brother and sister fled to escape scrutiny. The whole family was a wreck for a few days, but things are settling amongst them now. The wife of the brother is filing for divorce as well, along with custody and child support. Before they fled, neither of them signed divorce papers, so that's a waiting game for now. I'm relieved this was all exposed when it was because I can't imagine continuing that relationship any longer without knowing the truth. I just want to put this all behind me and I feel like I'm on the right track. I found a nice place and continue working for the same company I was in. I'm continuing to take this one step at a time. This whole thing is still so surreal for me. OP, I can't imagine the emotional torment you've been through. I'm so relieved you didn't decide to start having children with her before all of this was revealed. It would have been horrible if she got pregnant by her brother and tried to claim the inbred child was yours. Although this discovery caused you pain, it is so much better that the truth is out. I love how you handled this situation because you knew announcing it immediately wouldn't cause them to stop and might have even backfired on you. You were patient and fast, aiming to gather the much-needed evidence you required. These two people are horrible, not just because of their actions, but because they married two people and hid the affairs they had. I believe luck is on your side. This couldn't have been worse if it came out years later. I wish you the best of luck, OP. Now for today's second story. My wife and I were both busy working people when I discovered our marriage was over. She was 27 and I was 33. We were only married for 2 years, but maybe that was a good thing. On the day it went down, we arranged a short getaway together at a cabin almost 2 hours away from our house. After we arrived and got settled, she asked me to look up a recipe she wanted to make for dinner. My phone was almost dead, so I plugged it in and wondered how she was going to handle this. Over the past few months, I noticed she was distancing herself from me. She was on her phone way more and even added a passcode on it. This was weird because we worked so much, who would be trying to access her phone? She was so open with me up until it all changed and she just didn't feel the need to tell me about her day. So I told her my phone was charging to see what she'd do. She unlocked her phone and tossed it to me as she stirred, telling me to look it up on hers. I did so and read it to her. As I was just about to lock her phone again to be locked out of it forever, a silent WhatsApp notification appeared. I didn't know she had that app. I clicked on it instinctively and it led me to a string of messages between her and another man. The first 2 messages were, "Hey, how's it going? And I miss you so much. Can't stop thinking about how good you feel." I must have turned white because I felt the blood drain from my face. My vision became blurry and I left the room with her phone. She was still cooking, unaware anything was wrong. I focused my eyes and stilled my trembling hands so I could keep reading older stuff. It spanned back farther than I was willing to look. I took screenshots of their sexting pictures, talk of past sex and plans for future sex. And there I love you. I grabbed my keys with her phone in my hand and left. I didn't say anything to her. As I drove, I forged a message to her lover saying that the getaway ended early and he should meet her at a specific restaurant at a specific time. He agreed. I drove for 2 hours, although it felt like forever. I was in deep thought about what my future held now that my marriage was over. I already had anxiety about the next woman. I fall in love with cheating on me. I wondered what this guy was going to try to do or say to me, but it didn't really matter. The most I wanted was an explanation. When I saw him enter, I recognized him from the pictures and videos. I entered the restaurant right behind him and wrapped my arm around his shoulders. He jerked away and looked at me with major concern. Before he could say anything, I told him who I was, that he stole my wife from me and that we should talk about it. I led him to a table, started recording on my phone, which now had all the evidence from my wife's phone as well, and told him to spill the beans. He hesitated, but I told him this was the least he could do. He told me they had been seeing each other for about 10 months already. They were introduced by coworkers and instantly fell for each other. In a few weeks, she was in his bed. He swore she was the one for him and he was in love. I told him he could have it. I had no more use for her. I thanked him profusely for saving me 18 years of child support. I told him where she was and asked him to go pick her up. I drove home with a broken heart. It was broken before, but it was worse knowing how long ago this started. My phone rang and it was the landline from the cabin we were staying at. My wife was panicked, asking me if I was okay and why I just left like that. She added that she couldn't find her phone and forgot we had a landline. I called her a liar and said she shouldn't have let me see her phone if she was guilty of having an affair. She was stunned and started stuttering to make excuses. I told her she need not bother, that I had already met with the man and got all the proof I need. She started yelling in surprise, trying to clarify where I knew and who I spoke to. I added that he was on the way to come get her and she should pack all of our stuff. She said something else, but I hung up. I arrived home and packed up what I needed to be okayed for a few months. I didn't know how long she'd be in the house before she left. Thankfully we got a prenup so I wouldn't lose the house or pay her alimony. The last thing I did was update her social media. Changed her status to single and posted a selfie of the two. I put her phone down and heard it immediately start blowing up with confused friends and family. I called my best friend to vent and cry, and not only did he have space for me to stay for a while, but he also arranged for me to meet with his cousin, a divorce attorney. Before my friend arrived to pick me up, my wife was brought home by her lover. She was upset with me, which was ridiculous, and she kept asking me questions. For someone who knew what was going on, she sure was clueless. I started playing the recording of her lover explaining how they met and started sleeping together. She started crying her eyes out, claiming that he was exaggerating their relationship and she never planned on leaving me or continuing to see him. When she said this, he was standing in the doorway unbeknownst to her. He was offended and left. I thought good for him as he drove down the road and my wife screamed in frustration. I told her to pack her stuff and get out of the house because it belonged to me. I added that I'd send divorce papers to her parents' house. She sat on the front step crying as I left. I heard that she was still living with them when her boyfriend left her after an astounding 2 months. Since I had been paying for her schooling, she struggled to afford it on her own. Her parents couldn't afford it and actually made her move into a tiny apartment with her much younger sister. Meanwhile, I met the love of my life and we have our second child on the way. I can now say without a doubt that my wife is faithful, loving, and meant for me. I'm so thankful I decided to leave my ex right away without staying and trying to work it out. I am so sorry you went through this, OP. Thank the universe you didn't end up raising an affair child as your own or paying child support for years. It's extremely lucky you discovered the truth when you did and had the strength to take the steps you needed to. She started sleeping with a coworker without much hesitation or thought about her marriage with you. It turned out that even the man she cheated on you with dumped her. This is an excellent story to help spread hope to people that have been cheated on. It's definitely possible to let go of what you're used to and exist outside your comfort zone in order to heal and live a better life. I wish you and your new wife all the best. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened.